In a fire station in Livermore, California, a single incandescent light bulb has been burning almost continuously since 1901. Known as the Centennial Light, this hand-blown glass globe defies everything consumers expect about the lifespan of electronics. It is not an anomaly, but a relic of an era before a clandestine agreement altered global manufacturing. The Livermore bulb represents a time when engineers competed to create the longest-lasting products possible, a philosophy quietly assassinated in a Swiss boardroom. The death warrant for the long-lasting light bulb was signed just before Christmas in 1924. Top executives from the world's most powerful lighting manufacturers, including General Electric, Osram, and Philips, convened for a highly secretive Geneva meeting. They were not gathering to share technological breakthroughs. Instead, they formed the Phoebus Cartel, a multinational syndicate with a singular, unprecedented objective: to intentionally degrade the quality of their own products. To understand the cartel's motivation, look at the alarming success of early 20th century lighting technology. By the early 1920s, advancements had pushed the average lifespan of an incandescent bulb to an impressive 2,500 hours. For consumers, this was a triumph of engineering. For manufacturers, it was an impending financial disaster. A bulb that rarely burns out is a product that rarely needs replacing, threatening to choke off future revenue streams. The solution engineered by the syndicate was ruthless. The Phoebus Cartel mandated a strictly enforced 1,000-hour standard for all light bulbs produced by its members. This was not a natural technological regression, but the calculated origin of planned obsolescence. By artificially capping the product life cycle, the cartel guaranteed a perpetual cycle of consumer replacement, transforming a durable good into a consumable commodity and securing a predictable flow of capital. Enforcing this artificial limitation required a sprawling bureaucracy. The cartel established a central testing laboratory in Switzerland, where member companies sent samples of their bulbs on a regular basis. If a manufacturer's bulb lasted significantly longer than the mandated 1,000-hour standard, the company was hit with financial penalties. The longer a bulb burned past the limit, the higher the fine, creating a perverse incentive to engineer failure. This penalty structure forced a radical shift in research and development. Engineers at General Electric and other major firms were no longer tasked with improving filament durability. Instead, they spent millions of dollars figuring out how to make tungsten filaments more fragile without making them immediately defective. They had to perfectly calibrate the degradation, ensuring the bulb would shine brightly just long enough to satisfy the consumer before abruptly snapping. The strategy worked with terrifying efficiency. Between 1926 and 1933, as the lifespan of the average light bulb plummeted by more than half, cartel members saw their sales volume and profit margins soar. Because the syndicate controlled the vast majority of the global supply chain, consumers had no alternative. The public was forced to pay the invisible tax of constant replacement, entirely unaware that the fragility of their purchases was by design. To mask this deliberate degradation, the cartel launched marketing campaigns touting the benefits of shorter-lived bulbs. They argued the 1,000-hour standard provided brighter, more efficient light, claiming older bulbs consumed too much electricity as they aged. While there was a microscopic kernel of truth regarding energy efficiency, the underlying math heavily favored the manufacturers. The increased energy savings for the consumer never offset the cost of buying replacement bulbs twice as often. The iron grip of the syndicate eventually began to slip, not due to regulatory oversight, but because of global conflict. The outbreak of World War II severed the supply chains and communication networks that allowed the cartel to function. As member companies found themselves on opposite sides of a global war, the enforcement apparatus collapsed. The formal agreement that had orchestrated the global lighting market quietly dissolved into the chaos of the 1940s. Even though the formal organization fractured, the legal repercussions eventually caught up with the architects of the scheme. In 1942, the United States government launched an antitrust lawsuit against General Electric and its partners, exposing anti-competitive practices. The litigation dragged on for a decade, culminating in a 1953 verdict that prohibited these companies from sharing patents or artificially limiting product lifespans. The court officially condemned the practice, but the cultural damage was already done. The legal victory was a hollow one for consumers, because the fundamental economic philosophy pioneered in Geneva had already metastasized. The concept of artificially limiting a product's useful life proved far too profitable for the broader manufacturing sector to ignore. The strategy migrated from the lighting industry into automobiles, household appliances, and eventually consumer electronics. The cartel successfully proved that a company could generate infinitely more wealth by selling a flawed product repeatedly. As decades passed, the blunt instrument of fragile filaments evolved into sophisticated forms of built-in failure. Manufacturers realized they no longer needed to engineer physical breakage if they could manipulate design and compatibility. They began using proprietary screws to prevent independent repairs, gluing batteries directly into electronic casings, and designing hardware that was impossible to upgrade. The physical degradation pioneered in the 1920s transformed into a structural barrier against consumer ownership. Today, the most insidious form of this strategy exists entirely in the digital realm. Software updates now serve the exact same function as the cartel's fragile tungsten. Tech giants routinely release operating systems that demand higher processing power, intentionally slowing down older devices to the point of frustration. A smartphone might be physically pristine, yet rendered functionally useless by an invisible line of code. The 1,000-hour standard has been replaced by the 3-year software support window. Beyond physical and digital limitations, modern corporations weaponize psychology to accelerate the replacement cycle. Through relentless marketing and minor aesthetic tweaks, industries create perceived obsolescence, convincing consumers that a functional product is socially obsolete. The fashion industry, the automotive sector, and consumer electronics rely heavily on this constant churn of trends. The goal is to make the consumer feel inadequate for owning last year's model, driving sales through social pressure rather than mechanical necessity. The consequences of this relentless cycle manifest in a catastrophic environmental toll. The global economy now generates tens of millions of metric tons of electronic waste annually. Devices packed with toxic heavy metals and rare earth elements are discarded because it is cheaper to replace them than repair them. The financial strategy hatched a century ago has directly fueled a modern ecological crisis, turning the planet into a graveyard of prematurely discarded goods. In response to this escalating waste and financial exploitation, a formidable counter-movement has emerged. The Right to Repair Coalition actively fights to dismantle the barriers erected by modern manufacturers. Legislators globally are drafting laws requiring companies to provide access to spare parts, diagnostic manuals, and specialized tools. This movement is a direct challenge to the economic paradigm that dictates consumers merely rent their hardware until the manufacturer decides it is time for an upgrade. This legislative pushback forces a critical reevaluation of how global economic growth is measured. For nearly a century, economic health has been inextricably linked to the velocity of consumption. If products are built to last, the sheer volume of manufacturing and retail sales will inevitably decline, potentially disrupting traditional metrics of gross domestic product. The challenge is to decouple financial prosperity from the endless production of disposable goods, finding value in durability and sustainable engineering. The shadow of the Phoebus Cartel still stretches across every aisle of the modern marketplace. When a washing machine breaks down just after its warranty expires, or a laptop slows to a crawl after a mandatory update, it is not a stroke of bad luck. It is the echo of a century-old business model functioning exactly as intended. The true legacy of that 1924 meeting was the permanent re-engineering of consumer expectations, proving that in the pursuit of endless profit, durability is the ultimate enemy.